Hello again, everybody. Well, it's Bolo 14 already. How many more chapters is this guy gonna take to make this dang knife? Well, we'll see. Maybe 16, maybe 17. At any rate, here I am finally cutting some ivory for the handle. I put it onto the tang and just marked it out with a pencil. I'm just roughly blocking it out right now just to get some material out of the way. I'm using a coping saw. This material is a little bit sticky and it doesn't want to bandsaw very nicely, and I want to be careful cutting this, so I'm using a coping saw by hand on a bench pin with a leather pad there. Then I'm going to a sharp belt and just taking a little material off the edges to get rid of my saw cuts and smooth stuff up here. This ivory didn't smell too bad to work with, and it didn't burn too bad either if I was careful and used sharp belts. Pretty nice material, but you just got to be careful all the way through, not to chip things, not to crack stuff, burn stuff. So you'll see that coming up. Just working the material slowly and carefully. It's like $300 worth of ivory, so I definitely don't want to screw it up and start over again. Have to buy a new set. So this scale here is cut out and very roughly profiled with a fair amount extra on each edge to fit the tang here. And you can see I'm just going to have to deck the height of it down a fair amount. I'll leave it a little bit proud of the fitting there for a museum fit. It is nice thick stock though, so I do have some room to work with it. Now I just got to do the other one. Here I'm using a tool and die maker stone. I have a bunch of them, if you haven't noticed, in these like coconut milk cans over to the left of my vise, for various polishing detail areas and stuff. We got to remember that this whole blade, tang, guard, everything is hardened now, so we can't be going back and filing things at this point. Well, I did want to remove a little bit of material here that was causing some interference on the front of one of the scales, or both of them really, and just clean up any remaining schmutz from the heat treat. So this is like I think it's a 220 grit aluminum oxide Falcon tool die maker's stone. Works pretty good for this. Now we are going to put the frame back on, and at this point I have refit the frame again after heat treat to the blade, and so it fits up pretty much how it should at this point. We have a little tune-up left to do on it, but there's no more problem with things not being level with each other when installed. Installing the tang block there, gonna wrench it all up tight, and we'll be having the frame on for a while, tightened up as we fit the scales up to the frame and to the guard. And here I'm having a quick look just at the alignment of everything. I mean, I did this a bunch of times during the process with each scale, but here's a look at just kind of evaluation, one of those iterations. And lest I forget to mention real quick, please do hammer on that like button if you like this, and please do subscribe if you haven't already. So we're finished fitting up these scales. What I'm doing is I'm holding the knife here vertical. I got strong light on a couple of sides, and the main thing is to first locate to get the front steady against the front of the bolster with no gaps. I've been working on that. That looks good, actually. Then to make sure that we can, with a good fit at the front of the bolster, we have good alignment at the back of our scale. If not, then we would need to adjust the front of the bolster. And then with that taken care of,
The third thing to look at is, are we flat to the handle frame completely? And in this case, we're not quite. Where we need to do a little work is we need to sand this flat a little bit better by hand, lap it flat, and then we also need to cut a little bit more relief for the nut here. So I'll show you us doing that. I have a surface plate too, but it's a little bit cluttered up at the moment, and actually the cast iron bandsaw table here is definitely flat enough to serve as a lap with some sandpaper for wood and ivory. Some people tape it down. I find that creates a false sense of security. You're going to see that with use, sandpaper will grow a little bit and then it will start bunching up at the tape, and then you're going to start getting actually the edges of your pieces worn away a little quicker because the tape is kind of, or the abrasive has like a wave ripple ahead of the piece that the front edge of the piece is riding on, if that makes sense. So better to me to just hold it flat and then just be conscious of, am I kicking the paper up at all? Use sharp paper, light pressure, and then apply pressure evenly on the workpiece too. Try not to have a lot of rock to the stroke. A lot of the time they'll tell you to make a figure 8 pattern, which does eliminate some of the rock in the stroke, but then it makes it also more complex to hold the paper tightly in ways. So yeah, try a bunch of things, see what works for you. Myself, I'll often flip it around too. And then because it is kind of the nature of it that the ends will get a little bit more aggressively lapped than the center, despite your best efforts, then I will actually kind of ride over the edge of the plate here and give a little extra attention to the center. If anything, just to even cup it a little bit in the middle, because then it'll lie flat when screwed on if it's very slightly cupped in the middle. And we're talking almost nothing at all. But I tend to like bias things a little bit towards being negative in the middle. And that's true of a lot of fit-ups. Areas that you can't see or areas that you know are likely to be a problem, you can pre-adjust or create a little more room for clearance at the edges and trim areas. But let's have a look here. Okay. There's still a couple of heavier scratches from the 36 grit belt at the belt grinder and platen when I was thinning these scales down. So we're gonna try to work those out a little bit more. Yeah, they're coming out. They're almost gone. Call that good for now. Another thing we're going to do is, you can see right here, I've already pocketed it a little bit where that nut sits, but let's go just hit it up a little bit more and I'll show you that. And we haven't really spent on any time on video per se over at the carving and engraving area, but we are going to spend plenty of time here in the future. Mark my words. I've got to get a lot more time on the graver mock here. Because I owe it to the DeRosers and because I really want to go that direction with my work. I have been practicing scrolls and different cut patterns and things of that nature. And you can see I got a little scroll work in the vise now. Been doing some copper inlay and steel, but I need to level up and start putting the stuff on my knives. At any rate, I also have a flex shaft tool here with a foot pedal. It's got a carbide burr in it right now. I'm just gonna remove a little bit more material here freehand.
Pretty standard little flexible shaft tool. This is an old Vigor brand one, but I'm using like an 1/8 inch carbide burr with a rounded end to just kind of scribble around in there and remove some material.
Let's go see how that fits. It's definitely fitting better. I'm still causing it to sit up a little bit. We're going to find the pivot of that inaccuracy, and looks to be, yeah, right there. Right. Yep. Okay. It's the edge of this tang block. So we're going to sand that just a little bit. Right now, I'm using the number 50 bit that I marked the holes with, and that I drilled them before tapping in the handle frame. And I'm just doing some starter holes. I've got the back side of this scale taped up already to provide a little insurance against chip out. I'm not going to drill all the way through with these though. I'm catching you up because I've already drilled these to a partial depth. Just putting hand pressure on. I sharpen this bit. And I'm trying to not use much pressure. So I don't want to blow through this stuff unexpectedly and just push a big chip out of the surface. Right now I'm actually drilling pilot holes for the bit that I'm actually going to finish drilling these with. So now these are deep enough. I'm going to swap the bit out. We're going to use a brand new Sharp number 43 bit, which is a nice, almost snug clearance hole for 2x56. And we're going to finish the holes with this. I need to build an upside down drill press one of these days. I'm making sure I don't have a finger under that hole or anything. Just pecking at the bottom of it. Clearing the bit a lot, letting it cool. And I'm listening with my hands. For the feeling of starting to break through. And when I do, I ease up pressure. Because I need to break through the surface gently. And there we are. Now I'm just going to do the rest of them. Pull the tape off and see how we did. Little chip there, but not bigger than the counter bore. Yeah. We're okay so far. Yeah, we're good. A little surface chipping, but we'll just blend it a little bit, smooth it. It's not down through the color, and it's almost entirely within the envelope of the actual counter bore and screw head. So, good with that. So right now we are counter boring screw holes in the ivory, so the screw heads will sit down below the surface of the material a little bit. We're using a carbide counterbore made specifically for 2x56 button head screws, available from USA Knife Maker. 1/66 thou cut diameter with a 86 thou pilot. And we're just being real slow and careful. I got this thing on the highest speed. Carbide likes a high speed, and a chip-free hole likes a high speed. I've got the depth stop engaged, and I'm holding everything down real tight.
Thought I'd add here too, I sped the drill press up actually all the way to top speed when I drilled the holes in the second handle scale, just when I drilled the bolt holes, and it actually did an even more chip-free job doing that. So high speed is your friend. Also, the reason that I had put these holes through initially with a smaller bit than even a clearance bit was because I used the already threaded holes in the handle frame as a jig to mark out all of the drilled clearance holes for the bolts in the ivory. So I had to use that smaller like tap drill size to mark them, and then I came along after that with the actual clearance size for the bolts.
Okay, so we've got them all countersunk just to the point where the head is going to go below the surface of the material. And I did set this so that would be the case at the thinnest point of the material, here and here. But I'm actually not cutting all the way to the bottom of the depth stop when I'm in thicker material like here, here, and here, because I don't want some of the screws to look deeper than the other ones are in the material, and they'll actually end up being longer screws when they get halfway through the frame because they're standing up higher because the counterbore isn't as deep, but they'll look more uniform from the surface, and that's what I'm after. So now I've got one of my rubber sanding backers. It's a chunk of baler belt with a finer point ground on it, or like a chisel edge. I use this a lot for detail sanding, blending. Piece of 1000 grit Rhino wet paper. And then I'm just going to take and sand the edges of the holes a little bit by using the points on this little rubber sanding block. I've been getting it a little bit. You don't want to feel any sharpness at the edges of these holes. You don't want to chip them out any more than they already may have with drilling or counterboring, and you can actually make the chips look better if you selectively file and sand the edges of the holes a little bit. Like that right there. I'm going to come at that with actually a diamond Dremel point. Which I was just using, and I set it down right over here somewhere, like you do. Here's a couple of them. And then we'll just make it look less like a chip and more like just part of the bark texture of the ivory. And we're not doing this by with the actual Dremel power. We're gonna use this more like a sanding stick. If there's a chip here already, that means that unless we break the edge of it a little, it's liable to chip out more if we don't watch out. We don't want the ivory changing at all after we ship this knife out to our customer. We want it to be good and stay good. So to that end, anywhere it's chipped a little bit or might chip, or you're just gonna smooth it up, make it look better and make it less likely to chip in the future. And now it'll take a good polish too if it's at 1000 grit. 1000 grit by hand, and then a buff, and boom, stuff just gets real nice and shiny. And now we're just going to come at it from the other direction a little bit and get the other side of this hole. It's nice if you can see a little bit of shine from a radius on the edge of the hole. The buff will, of course, help that at the end of the process. Now, I don't work with a lot of ivory. I've been fortunate enough to be able to get tips from some guys who do. Actually, my student Will Stelter works with ivory more. We got a little from him and a little bit from Kyle Royer. And boy, if you don't watch their channels, which you probably do if you're watching me, you've probably been watching those guys for a while. Go check them out if you haven't, because there's tons of good stuff there. Kyle Royer's, one of the best knife makers in the world, and so you get to see him build just crazy cool stuff. All right, that's probably good for this one. I'm actually gonna go have a look at it on the knife. Now we're getting somewhere. I am gonna need to chamfer this and bring this down to a museum fit with this. So I'll be doing that, and then I'm gonna have to finish taking this down to an acceptable museum fit, i.e. just proud of the frame on both sides. But that's going to be a lot easier to do now that we have the finished location of the scale set in stone. So now I'm going to repeat all those processes you just saw for the other scale off camera, and then we're going to pick back up after I'm done with that. Alrighty then. Well, let's have a quick look. Handle's all screwed on. Some little adjustments left. But mostly now I've just got to take the edges down a little farther. They're going to stay slightly proud of the handle frame, but only by 10, 15 thou, I want to say. And then also I got to take the fronts of these down a little bit, and then I got to trim actually the end of the handle frame back a little bit shorter so I can get that proud fit on that facet. So a little fussy work left, but the whole knife is fabricated now, and now I just gotta finish dimension the ivory, polish it, and then it's take them off, hand sand the blade on the edges of the frame, and etch it.
Using a variety of files here. Whenever I find files at yard sales, secondhand stores, whatever, I try to pick them up if they're even halfway decent. Old files are just gold if you can find them. I came across a small coffee can with a bunch of needle files at actually a local yard sale a couple of years ago. That was a major score. Beautiful little needle files. I think I got them all for like $5. And then I have, this is like die maker size files here, or die sinkers files, kind of a medium between a needle file and like small mill file sizes, and just kind of play around with whatever one seems to cut with the least clogging, and then just try to knock the ivory out of the file as I go. Really need to shape this stuff with some finesse when it's this close to the steel frame anyway, so filing is really the appropriate pace of work as far as I'm concerned. Chainsaw files are always super good for knife making too. You never know when you're going to be able to use a chainsaw file for this or that. The nice thing is chainsaw files are still made out of quality steel and given a good heat treat, because they have to cut saw teeth that are already pretty hard, and you get them from reputable company brands like Steel and stuff, so they tend to be pretty good. I don't think you guys have seen this buffing arm before. This is on my old shop-built grinder, and some newer companies like Broadbeck and stuff are offering these grinding belt driven buffing arms, but to my knowledge, I am the original inventor of this, at least as far as I've seen. The hardcore grinders did have a buffing arm feature, but those follow the Burr King model, where contact wheels and whatever else mount on an arbor that is V-belt driven by the machine. But this is the first tooling arm grinding belt driven accessory arm that I've seen. I came up with it back in 2010 or something maybe, and kind of put it out there on blade forums, and some other guys built them. But at any rate, it's super handy. I have a tapered cone, like a quick change thread-on buffing wheel adapter that I bought. It's actually a Bolo branded one, 3/4 inch threads inside, just on the end of that shaft, and so I can just quickly spin my buffing wheels off when I'm done using them and keep them away from grit when they're not really being used. Here I am putting a handle scale back on. I had to take them off and put them on a bunch of times during this build, but I thought I would let you guys see me do it once, and sped up at that. But much like making folding knives, you're constantly having to take it apart, put it back together, take it apart, put it back together for all kinds of reasons. I had taken the scale down on both sides in thickness to the height that I wanted, but then I'm just carefully blending the front of it, again with that baler belt backer, first with 400 just to get the shape, and then with 1000 to just polish the front of that a little bit, and I go hit it up on the buffer again. I've noticed some knife makers seem to like to always have the work clamped, positionable work clamps and all that kind of stuff, and I do try to stay conscious of when that would really be a positive, but at other times I very much am like finishing things with sandpaper while just kind of holding them in a freestyle fashion in my hands. It doesn't present any real difficulties in terms of leverages, and it adds a lot of actual positionability. So
let's take a look. We've got the scales all polished up and proud fit around the fit up to the steel with slight chamfers and blending, sanded to 1000 grit, and then buffed with pink rouge. We took very little color off in the process, for which I am glad. You see, very slight proud fit with a polish, so it doesn't feel sharp. As even as possible all the way around. About 10 to 15 thou all the way around the butt here of the handle. See it there and there. Just gorgeous color to this ivory. Proud fit around the top here, polished. And you can see it there. So the scales are done. At this point, I'm just going to remove them from the knife, hand sand the entire surface of the knife, and etch all of the steel.